Thank you all for coming. Hare Krishna. What's your name? So this is my first visit to the island. It's not like Hotel California, is it? You can check out whenever you want, but you can never leave. First of all, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for all of you who are continuing to help this project under somewhat challenging circumstances. It's a beautiful temple, and the devotees who are faithfully serving here, serving the deities, keeping this project going, I think really deserve a lot of credit for showing real devotion to Krishna and real devotion to Prabhupada's mission. So I appreciate that. Where's Mahamantra?
She's going to see her mother.
Going to see her mother? Apparently she does a lot of service. Anyway, so I opened to this verse. It's chapter 9, text 2. Actually, I want to read a few verses because although we are accustomed to seeing the Bhagavad Gita verses, one by chapters, and then one verse, and of course translation and purport, actually the Gita has paragraphs. The Bhagavad Gita has paragraphs, it has arguments that it makes. Krishna makes different arguments, and so, and raises different topics. So in chapter 9, it's very interesting. I'd like to read the first several verses of chapter 9 to see what Krishna's actually talking about. It's a very interesting, you could say it's a very interesting paragraph, or it's an interesting topic in Bhagavad Gita. So, Krishna begins, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, the Lord said, Idam tu te guyatamam pravakshami anasuyave. Pravakshami is the future tense in Sanskrit, means I will teach you. As Prabhupada says, I shall impart to you. Prabhupada's translation, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, and that's the Sanskrit word anasuyave, unto you who are not envious, I shall impart to you, pravakshami, this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. So Krishna says, Idam tu te guyatamam. Guyatamam means most confidential. He says, I will impart, or I shall teach to you who are not envious. Jnanam vijnana sahitam. Jnana together with vijnana. So, yagyatva, knowing which, moksha se shubhat, you will be freed from ashubha, which means the inauspicious, or that which is not good, all that is not good. So, Prabhupada actually, maybe everyone, we try not to keep our back to Prabhupada, just to, otherwise I'll feel guilty, because Prabhupada always would say, thank you. So, Prabhupada actually picked out a word from this verse and made it the what do you call it? Not the slogan, but the theme of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, the Science Institute that he began in the mid-70s. And the word he picked out was this word sabhijnanam, or I'm sorry, it's vijnana sahitam. Vijnana in Sanskrit, in this context, is often taken within the tradition, Vaishnava tradition, to mean knowledge in the sense of book knowledge, and then realized knowledge that you actually realize, the realization of the knowledge. That's why Prabhupada took it. So because the essence of science is that you actually realize it, you not only have a theory, but you can test your theory, you can demonstrate the truth of your theory, and other people, other reasonably qualified people, can observe the results of your test, of your experiment, and can therefore share in the same objective understanding. And so science is possible, and that was Prabhupada's point, whether it's a material or spiritual science. Science is possible when we have observable claims. We say something is true, and people can actually see that it's true. Of course, how you get to see that it's true involves qualifications. For example, when Einstein made one of his big discoveries, a reporter from the New York Times was interviewing the head of the Royal Astronomy, something or other, in Britain. Everything there is royal. And it was, the main astronomy association of Britain, and this reporter from the New York Times was speaking to the lead scientist, the director, and said, "Can you explain Einstein's discovery in terms that the layman can understand?" To which the scientist said, "No, I can't. Because one requires certain background in science, you have to have some prior knowledge in order to get it." So even in the world of science, it's not that scientists prove their theories to some guy on the street, someone who's selling, baked apples on the street or something. Scientists prove their theories to other scientists. So in the same way, there is a community of recognized acharyas or Vaishnavas, and so you have the system of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. One's own Guru, and then Sadhu, other saintly people, and Shastras. And when all these things come together, like in Las Vegas, you get 3 blueberries and all the coins come out. You probably don't go very often to Las Vegas. Okay, anyway. But you've probably seen it on television or something. So when the 3 line up, the slot machine, they call it the one-armed bandit. Bless you, then you win. So in the same way, when Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra line up, then you win. But qualified people have to be able to experience it. And that's exactly what's happened historically with the Bhagavad Gita. The reason we read Bhagavad Gita, the reason the Gita is so famous, the reason so many people actually take it seriously, is that for thousands of years, people have read this book, they have carried out Krishna's teachings, and they find that they get the results. That if you, for example, Krishna says, Satatam Kirtiyanto Mam, my devotees are always glorifying me. So if you actually do it, then you realize Krishna. You realize that Krishna is a real person, and that he cares about you, and he's ready to do business. Krishna's open for business. If you want to practice bhakti, American, right? What did you expect? So Krishna, the idea is that if you practice bhakti yoga, if you glorify Krishna, he will reciprocate with you. That's what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Jai jata mam prapadyante. As people approach me, tang tataiva bhajamiham, I reciprocate with them exactly in the same way. Tataiva, precisely, in that way. So we find that's true. That's why we're all still doing this. Because we find that when we make a sincere effort, when we really try to please Krishna, to chant his name seriously, to serve him nicely, when we really make that effort, that we get reciprocation. There's actually someone on the other end of the line. And we're dealing with a real person. So, in that way, the experienced and advanced practitioners of Bhakti Yoga are like, you could say, not like, they are the community of spiritual scientists, just as there is a community in all the different branches of science. There are communities of recognized experts. So the community of recognized experts in Krishna consciousness have all understood and accepted this spiritual science. So there has to be realization. Now, listen, what does Krishna say next? Because he's introduced this idea. The next Krishna says, Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam, Pavitram Idam Uttamam, Pratyakshavagam dharmyam susukam kartamavagam. This is a very famous verse, which Prabhupada translates as follows: this knowledge is the king of education, Raja Vidya. The most secret of all secrets, Rajaguhyam. It is the purest knowledge, Pavitram, Idam Uttamam, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is a perfection of religion. So what Krishna says literally here is he calls this Pratyakshavadamam, which I will explain for a slight additional fee. You get a simultaneous Sanskrit translation if you want the deluxe package. Anyway, just kidding. So, Prati and Aksha. Pratyaksha generally means in Sanskrit direct perception. Aksha means, it can mean the eye or vision. And, just like they say in English, seeing is believing. So in English or in Sanskrit, because seeing is our most prominent sense, seeing is often taken to be either a direct description or metaphor of all other kinds of understanding. Just like we say, for example, you have to see my point. It's like, did you just draw a point on the wall that we have to see? So when someone says, you have to see my point, they don't mean to see a physical point. They mean to understand what I'm saying. And so in English, as in Sanskrit, seeing is taken as a sort of stands for various ways of perceiving. And prati, it can mean various things in Sanskrit. It can mean counter or against in the sense of something which is actually against something else. Like, for example, pratyupaya means a countermeasure. Or, in this case, prati can mean against in the sense of something firmly connected to something else. So, pratyaksha here means direct perception, like your sense of actually come up against something. And then avagamam, there's an interesting word. I think we'll have to, Hare Krishna? Yeah, I think we'll have to.
You don't like it?
Well, I like the kid.
I know,
It's
okay. Everybody's different. So
one thing you could do is if you open this door right here and kind of have the child play outside, that way you could hear.
That's okay.
Yeah, but if you open the door here, it's like could be a solution. So, Ava. Sorry, kid, you just got a red card. Well, it's the best I could offer. So, Ava in Sanskrit means down or downward, as in the word avatara, which literally means down crosser, one who crosses down from the spiritual realm to the material realm. Is called an avatara, down crossing. The word for crossing, tara, also like in Prabhupada's Pranam Mantra, Paschatya Desha Tarine, means literally one who brings the Western countries across from the material to the spiritual. So that's the word tara, so avatara. Now, ga in Sanskrit is our English go. There's lots of connections between English and Sanskrit. So ga is go. And so avagamam here means, it's a common verb, literally meaning to go down or to go into something, and it means somewhat, what's that word in English? Oh God. Anyway, it means to understand something deeply, like you go deeply into something. You go deeply into something, avaga. Just like Krishna says, for example, in that famous verse at the end of chapter 10, Yad Yad Vibhuti Matsatam Srimarurjitam Evava Tattadev Avagachatvam, that whatever is mighty or powerful or beautiful in this world, know it to be a spark of my splendor. So when what's translated as know or understand it to be as avagacha, which literally means go deeply into it. Understand something by going deeply into it, avagacha. And here we have the word avagamam, so pratyaksha avagamam, which means to go deeply within something, to understand something by direct perception, where the senses really come up against something and you have direct perception. So you're not seeing something indirectly, but pratyaksha means that your senses are coming directly against something. So that's that word, pratyaksha. You all understand that? You're getting the deluxe package here. So that Prabhupada translates that direct perception of the self by realization. Dharma. Dharma means, in Sanskrit, it means law, it means justice. So that when Krishna says, when you say it can be translated religious principles, Prabhupada said the principles of religion, we have to understand what that actually means, the principles of religion. Prior, you could say, really, to the Industrial Revolution, and prior to the rise of highly urbanized secular societies, there was not really a distinction made between religion and other activities of life. That's why, for example, if you look at European history, you see that religion was even physically in the center of life, and that's why you found in the center of most towns or villages a church, and there really wasn't a strict separation between religious laws and civil laws. I mean, there could be obviously distinctions, but basically governments were non-secular, which means that there wasn't the idea that the government has to be strictly separate from religion. In fact, governments were not strictly separate from religion. And if you look at, it's interesting, if you look at the world of the Mahabharata, if you think about the world that's described there, one interesting thing is there are no religious institutions, which you may not have noticed, but actually there aren't. If you look in the Bhagavatam, there are no religious institutions. There are certainly spiritual traditions and there are communities, but they don't actually have, in the modern institutional corporate sense, a religion. Or even in the ancient sense of the Catholic Church, or even that's even anachronistic. If you look at early Christian history, certainly before the Protestant Reformation, and even before the Roman Catholic Church split from the Orthodox Church, there was just the church. And it had its headquarters in Rome, especially before the founding of Constantinople. So it was an institution, it had a hierarchy. In fact, the church very consciously modeled itself on the Roman Empire. And so because the political center of the empire was Rome, they made the political center of the church Rome. And they had the same provinces. They even, for example, the papacy or the pontiff, which is named for the Pope, was actually a political term. It wasn't a religious term. They even took Roman political titles. And whether or not this is a good idea, I'll leave it to you to decide. I have my own opinions. But in any case, the church history is not always a pretty thing. But what I mean to say is that kind of structure where you have like political titles and regional administrations and a central command and all that, you don't find that in the Bhagavatam. There's nothing like that in the Bhagavatam. There's nothing like that in the Mahabharata, interestingly enough. Of course, the idea of having actual Vaishnava institutions began long, long before ISKCON, and even long before Lord Chaitanya. Because, for example, you see in the modern period, if you want to call modern the last 1,000 years, Ramanuja, the Sri Vaishnavas definitely had a type of institution, a type of structure. They had senior members who voted, for example, on who should be the Acharya. And the same thing, the Madhva Sampradaya, they have very clear organizations, definitely an institution. So it's interesting because religious institutions as such, with hierarchies and rules and bylaws and all that, is not that old in India. It's not that old in India. And the reason I mention this is when we talk about religious principles, for example, if you had a Hindu king in India or a Vaishnava king in a particular state or in a particular kingdom, then it would be a Vaishnava kingdom. And the principles, such as, for example, you couldn't kill cows, or that temples, mandirs, had certain privileges, very similar to medieval Europe. The laws themselves were often based on Shastra, so it's not that like nowadays where you have a separate set of religious principles which are different from the general moral system. So if you look at how the word dharma is used in the Shastra, it's not used in the modern sense to mean a set of religious principles that are entirely separate from civil law or the general customs of a society. Dharma just means the principles of civilization. It means law. Dharma means law. And dharma means justice, and ultimately dharma means... So dharmyam, the word dharmyam, which is used here to describe what Krishna's teaching, the Y in there, dharmyam, means something which is conducive to dharma. Something which conduces to dharma, something which is favorable for dharma, which leads to dharma. Meaning justice. Meaning justice, meaning the principles by which one advances in consciousness, all that is dharma. So dharma is also the word for law, dharma is the word for justice. So that, for example, in the Mahabharata, when Drupada, after Arjuna won Draupadi, and then he took her away to where the Pandavas were staying, and Drupada, and all the excitement and fighting off the disappointed Kshatriyas that didn't win Draupadi. Draupadi had this power to sort of make men a little crazy. That was one of the reasons why she came to this world, so they would kind of bewilder the Asuras. But anyway, in all the excitement, when Arjuna and Bhima fought their way out of the Swayamvara, and then Drupada realized, oh my God, I don't even know who took my daughter. Because he had all these kings, all these princes who everybody knew. They were like, world leaders, everyone knew who they were. But then kind of like Arjuna came up, he was sort of dressed like a Jedi Knight. He actually was, because he was disguised as a Brahmana. And no one in the world, if he was wearing normal, like form-fitting clothes, no one was going to think he was a Brahmana. Because he was this like really large guy, very strong. You have to remember the Pandavas were not actually human. I mean, they were half human. They had a human mother, but their fathers were all demigods. And they were kind of bigger and stronger than humans. And so if he just would have sort of walked out there like, hi, I'm a Brahmin. Yeah, right. And I'm Queen Elizabeth. So he actually wore kind of like this Jedi Knight thing. Sort of covers, your physique. And no one knew who he was. I mean, he was with the Brahmins, so it was kind of like the honor system. Okay, he's with the Brahmins. The Brahmins think he's a Brahmin, so I guess he's a Brahmin. And then he came forward, and when he came forward, I mean, it's very interesting. If you look carefully at the Mahabharata, it's obvious there were class tensions. I mean, you may think it was always, do you say in Ireland, peachy dandy? Or is that American? Huh?
It's American. That's very American.
Peachy dandy. Okay, that's a positive expression, meaning it's kind of somewhat facetious. But anyway, so Arjuna came forward, and the Kshatriyas, if you read the original text of Mahabharata, were really not happy about this. They're saying, hey, we've got to bow down to Brahmins and give charity to Brahmins, and now they want our women. Like, give us a break. They were really kind of unhappy about this because if you read the Mahabharata, there were times when Brahmins and Kshatriyas killed each other. For example, Parashuram appeared as a Brahmin, and he killed the Kshatriyas, and then there were Kshatriyas sometimes that killed the Brahmanas. So, it's because these were the two most powerful classes. No one ever thought like Vaishyas or like, it. But the Kshatriyas were the kings, were the rulers. They have all this opulence, all this power, and the Brahmins have their power and their opulence of knowledge and austerity. And so there was tension. Historically, sometimes they get along really well and cooperate, and sometimes they kill each other. They cooperated more often than they killed each other, but so you see this tension very clearly when Arjuna comes forward to compete for Draupadi. The Kshatriyas are really angry and unhappy about this. Like, we already have to give you respect and give you gifts and all this. Now you want our women, so they're really unhappy. And then Arjuna actually won Draupadi. And the Kshatriyas, of course, when Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that yoga, nashta, parantapa, the actual spiritual science is lost. We know Krishna came at the end of Dwapara Yuga, things were becoming a little degraded, because the word Swayamvara literally means one's own choice. Swayam means personal or one's own, and Vara is choice. So theoretically, it seems like the princess just chose someone. That's what the word means. Swayamvara means one's own choice. But if you look, by the time Krishna comes to this world, more often than not, even if a prince wins a girl fair and square, he has to fight his way out of the arena, which means that these princes were really sore losers. So what was going on? It's I think what we're seeing is a culture that's already degraded. That's what Krishna says. Krishna says that I come. That he says yada dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. When dharma is declining, when dharma is collapsing, that's when I come. And I think one of the examples of this is the kind of like the rowdy, unprincipled, ungentlemanly, sore loser Swayamvaras you see all over the place. So anyway, when Arjuna won Draupadi, the Kshatriyas were really unhappy, and they came to kind of interfere, and then Yudhisthira, I think, was staying home with Kunti and his mother. The twins were somewhere, so as usual, it was Bhima and Arjuna that kind of took care of business. Among all the Pandavas were great warriors, but Bhima and Arjuna were the real, they were definitely the heaviest of the Pandavas in terms of fighting. And also Bhima's got his big Jedi Knight robe on. And so they have to fight off all these Kshatriyas, and it's like pandemonium, plus some of them are really angry at Drupada because Drupada's the father. Why did he let a non-Kshatriya win the princess? It was just a big mess. It was just pandemonium. So in all that pandemonium, Arjuna and Bhima kind of fight their way out. They hate Draupadi, and then Drupada realizes, I have no idea whatsoever who just took my daughter. And this is, Vedic culture, everything's like really controlled and there's rules, and he has no idea who just took his daughter. So therefore he sent his son, the very powerful Drishtadyumna, who's actually like the twin brother of Draupadi. They're born at the same time, both mystically. And he sends him to spy. There's a lot of espionage in Vedic culture, as there is today in modern culture. As it turns out, if you read the news, which I don't recommend, basically, even in NATO, for example, everyone's spying on everyone else. Like America is spying on European countries, they're actually spying on America, and the European countries are spying on each other. So everyone's spying on everyone. And it was kind of like that back then, too. Some things never change. So Drupada sent Drishtadyumna to follow Bhima and Arjuna and Draupadi. And he follows them to where they're staying, and he kind of watches them. Then he comes back, and Drupada, he's the anxious father. He's the father. He's just like reeling anxiety. He has no idea who took his daughter, and he wants to know what. It's interesting. One serious consideration, like, are they really Brahmins? Or are they Kshatriyas? Like, who are they? And he's thinking, God help me if they're Sudras. And so, but he doesn't want to commit an offense. He realizes. It's interesting. They're like there's all this protocol, and so therefore when they're going to have the wedding the next day, and so he arranges all the paraphernalia and gifts for all four varnas, depending on what it turns out to be. But Drishtadyumna comes and says, Dad, says to Drupada, they are not Brahmins. They're definitely not Brahmins. Because once they got back and took off their Jedi Knight robes, they're like these really large, strong guys. He said they have all kinds of scars. There are certain scars on the arm from shooting a bow a lot. Like you shoot a bow, so you get certain kinds of little marks on you. And so then Drishtadyumna said all they talk about is war stories. That's all they talk about, fighting, wars. They have all the marks of warriors. But anyway, somehow I got into the story. So then they come the next day, and that's a key turning point in the Mahabharata. Because despite our somewhat sort of like, sometimes we have like a comic book conception of the history, but in the real world, when the Pandavas were were hiding, they had no real weapons to speak of, they had no army, and therefore they were always in great danger. They were in danger of their lives. If you look at the unabridged battle scenes of the Mahabharata, everybody says like, Bhima alone can conquer everyone, and basically every kshatriya on the face of the earth can defeat all the demigods, probably with the left hand, and can defeat all the other kshatriyas. But when the war actually starts, it's not like that. It's like a real fight, and no one can just defeat everyone. It's a real fight. And the Pandavas didn't really have to fight, because the whole point of the Pandavas coming, I may remind you, is that the earth had been invaded. When the Krishna book starts, I'm going to get back to Dharma, by the way, I just somehow sort of lost in Dwapara Yuga here. But when the Krishna book begins saying once the world was overburdened by demons disguised as kings, it doesn't mean that they were kings who weren't Krishna conscious, and therefore they're demons, and real kings are Krishna conscious, so they're demons disguised as kings. That's not the point. The point is, they were actually from another planet. They were actually asuras from other planets that invaded the earth. They were disguised as kings in the sense they were disguised as human beings. They were actually from other planets. And so therefore, when the Pandavas fought them, it was like a real fight. Because on both sides, you're talking about people with, they're superhuman. So that being the case, when the Pandavas had no army, no backing, just alone, no like serious weapons, they were constantly in danger of their lives. But once they won Draupadi, this automatically and immediately formed a powerful alliance. Because after the Kurus, probably the second most powerful kingdom was the Panchalas. In fact, even if you read the Rig Veda, what you find is that the two great kingdoms are the Kurus and the Panchalas. So now they have an alliance, they have a whole powerful kingdom behind them, and they can get rid of these baggy clothes. And so when they come to Drupada's palace, they're dressed as the Pandavas. King Drupada, his fondest wish had been to marry his daughter to one of the Pandavas, and then when he sees them, it's obvious they're kings or princes, because the way they walk, the way they carry themselves, the way they sit, they're like, it's no more, like begging, humble Brahmins. They're very much acting like royalty. And then Drupada, everyone's kind of astonished to see them now that they're actually dressed properly and kind of revealing who they are. And then it turns out that Drupada's desire has been satisfied, that these are really the Pandavas, and he assumes he's going to marry his daughter to Arjuna. But then Yudhishthira says, well, actually, there's a little complication here. Because as you know, they were all five going to marry. And then Yudhishthira says, actually, in our family, the eldest has to marry before the younger, which is a custom even in the British Isles, actually, even a few hundred years ago. So Drupada said, no problem, any Pandava is fine with me. So Yudhishthira, you marry, and then Yudhishthira says, well, actually, it's even a little more complicated than that. And then he explains that all five Pandavas, imagine if you're a father, and some guy comes, and the girl says, hi, Dad, this is my fiance, and also his brother, and also the other brothers. What father would be like ecstatic to know his daughter's going to marry five brothers? And so Drupada's reaction is pretty much the way a normal guy's reaction would be, like, what? It's very interesting because Drupada then claims, how can this be Dharma? The reason I mention this, if you actually look, because I did look, if you do a computer search in the Mahabharata and see all the places where Dharma is used, the word Dharma in the Mahabharata, at least I can say the first 400 or 500 chapters, it really is about law and not just religious principles like chant Hare Krishna. It's actually mostly about sex and violence. Those, that you need in any good movie, right? It's really about sex and violence, because violence, like Kshatriyas, when people actually fight, or when people become romantically or sexually attracted to each other, obviously these two activities, romance/sex or fighting/violence, are the most passionate human activities, and therefore the most dangerous to civilization. It's precisely when people become really attached, they commit crimes of passion, people become very strongly attached, or when they go to fight, that their passion is so strong that they can't easily pose a threat to civilization, to morality. And therefore, if you look in the Mahabharata, the word dharma is mostly used, almost always used, in those two things, like who can marry whom? Because, how do you channel your libidinal drive? How do you channel your sex desire? Like who can, like who has a right to marry that woman? What woman has a right to marry that man? Because in a civilized society, people don't just run around, getting cheap hotel rooms. They actually get married. And so therefore, that's sex desire is channeled into marriage, and therefore, unless there's very clear definitions of who could marry whom, and under what circumstances, you get all kinds of crimes of passion, killings, even like in Swayamvaras. So dharma is used a lot in that case, as Drupada uses it, and also for fighting, like what is, under what circumstances is a human being entitled or authorized to actually commit violence against another human being. So that's how dharma is used. So if you want to take that as religious principles, in the sense that all law comes from God. There's even a legal concept called natural law, that actually there are natural laws existing in the universe apart from human invention. So when Krishna says dharmyam, this process is dharmyam, it means it leads you to behave properly according to the laws of the universe, which are the laws of God. And even surrendering to Krishna is ultimately an act of justice, because the heart of justice, the basis of all justice is quid pro quo, that fair reciprocation. You give something which is commensurate with, which is fair considering what you've gotten. So even in relationships between men and women, relationships work when there's fair reciprocation. And when there's not fair reciprocation, it doesn't work. So ultimately, the ultimate reciprocation is with Krishna, because he's giving us everything. So we have to give him everything. We give ourselves to Krishna, Atmanivedana. We give everything to Krishna for the simple reason that he's giving us everything. So it's actually, that's dharma. So in that sense, Krishna is saying that this knowledge I'm about to give you will lead to dharma, in the sense it will make you a just and fair soul who fairly reciprocates with everyone, including God. So that's really kind of like the essence of it. So, and Krishna says, Susukam kartum aviyam. Kartum. In English, you form the infinitive of verb by adding the preposition to, like to fight, to run, to jump, to sneeze. And so in Sanskrit, you form the infinitive of verb by adding tum, T-U-M, after a word. So here we have kartum, which means to do. This process is very susukam, it is very joyful, very happy to do, to perform, to execute. Kar, anyway, I'm going to all the grammar here. From the verb kri, which means to do, we still have this in English from Sanskrit in words like create or increase. Create, that's Sanskrit kri. Anyway, so here we have the infinitive kartum, su. Su means very, which we, or well, or very, which we also have in English, by the way. The su is also in English, or the Greek, which changed it to EU, as in euphony, like a good sound, or eugenics, good breeding. And no, you don't know Spanish, this is Ireland. Anyway, so susukam, very happy, in the sense of like well happy, it'll well make you happy. And so anyway, it's very joyful to perform, to do, and it's abhiyam, it's unperishing. It never wears out. It's not like chewing gum, wears out, or a movie you've seen 300 times. or a relationship you've been in too long. So it starts to lose its taste. So what Krishna is saying, that this joy, this pleasure is actually unperishing. Of course, if you have a relationship with another person, whether it's friendship or conjugal relationship, and if the relationship is based on Krishna, then it doesn't wear out. If it's just if Krishna is not there, it's going to go the route of chewing gum, lose its taste. But if Krishna is really in the center, not just like, officially, then because the relationship is based on Krishna, it's always enjoyable because it's based on Krishna, serving Krishna. So Prabhupada once said that if you're a devotee and you're not happy, you're doing something wrong. Interesting statement. If you're not happy, you're doing something wrong. So, because Krishna says right here, it's right there. As I say, if everything else fails, read the instructions. So Krishna says right here, Susukam kartum aviyam. It's unperishing and it's very joyfully performed forever. So if I'm not very joyful, I'm doing something wrong. Now it's interesting because it's just like, let's say your hand itches, and so the immediate unthinking response is you scratch it. Or if you're hungry, you eat. So we're conditioned in this world to think that if I feel some lack, something missing in myself, I just go get it. Whether it's food, water, companionship, shelter, roof over my head, whatever it is, you feel something's lacking, I need something, you go get it and you consume it in some way or another. However, in Krishna consciousness, you actually have to override this sort of automatic impulse. You actually have to override it, because if I'm not happy, then the natural impulse is, okay, how can I be happy? Like, I need to do something to make myself happy. Maybe I'm in the wrong place, maybe I'm with the wrong person, but I have to make myself happy. Again, we're talking here about an emotional state. I mean, obviously, if you don't feel good because you're eating junk food or junk prasadam, forgive the term, then yeah, you should think about how to eat properly, or if you're in an abusive relationship, you should get out of it. So there are situations where you really need to adjust your lifestyle. I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about a situation where you're basically doing your duty, you're just not happy. And in that case, the impulse says, okay, how can I make myself happy? But the real question we need to ask is, how can I make Krishna happy? If I'm, basically practicing Krishna consciousness and I'm not happy, and Prabhupada said I'm doing something wrong, what I'm doing wrong is very simple. I'm not making Krishna happy. Krishna is in the heart, so if I please Krishna, I'm pleased. And if I'm not feeling happy inside, it's because I didn't please Krishna. So it's a trap to think, okay, I'm not happy, how can I be happy? I need to buy something, or I need to, change something. If we really just think, why aren't I pleasing Krishna right now? Somehow I'm not pleasing Krishna. How can I please Krishna? And as soon as you start to please Krishna, then you're pleased. So again, it's like if your hand feels weak, you put the food in the mouth, it goes to the stomach, and the hand feeds itself by giving the food away. And so you have to sort of override this very basic, primal, natural tendency. I'm not happy, I want to take happiness somehow. You have to override that, and like the hand giving the food away to feed itself, you have to please Krishna to make yourself happy. Anyway, we've explained some points. Any questions so far? No? Going. Okay?
Why are we not all happy all the time?
What's that?
Why are we not all happy all the time then?
Why are we not happy all the time? Because we're not pleasing Krishna all the time. Simple. So, to please Krishna is the real art. That's what we should be thinking about. And that's why everything we do, we have to really try hard to understand before we set out on some course of action, is this really what Krishna wants me to do? Because if it is, you'll be happy. The only real happiness is knowing in your heart, in your brain also, that Krishna really wants me to be doing this. Krishna really wants me to be here. Krishna really wants me to do this. And if you really have that certainty in your heart, then there's no other problem in life. Other problems, like I was saying, it's just like the weather. If you have a nice house, if you have a nice comfortable house, and the weather is not great, it's just the weather. You're still inside your house. So in the same way, if you're in this real shelter of Krishna consciousness, whatever else happens in life, whether people love you or hate you or whatever else is going on, it's just the weather. That you have your secure shelter. And actually Krishna uses this imagery of living in Krishna, like, your address is 108 Krishna Avenue. I mean, he says, in chapter 12 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Mana eva, mayeva mana adhatsva, which means fix your mind in me alone. Mayeva mana adhatsva, mayi buddhi niveshaya, and dedicate your intelligence to me. We're actually supposed to be intelligent, not like, if I really love Krishna, I'll shut my brain down and just mechanically do things. No. If you love Krishna, you have to turn your brain on and start thinking about how to serve him. But Krishna says, dedicate your intelligence to me. And then he says, nivasishasi mayeva. He says, you will dwell in me alone. The verb nivasishasi is second person, singular, future of the verb nivas. I know I just made your day for that grammatical information. The verb vas, among other things, means to dwell, and vasa means a dwelling. That's why, for example, because Krishna is the abode or the dwelling of the goddess of fortune, he's called Sri Vasa or Sri Nivasa. Ni means within, and so Vasa means dwelling, and Nivasa just means dwelling in something. So Sri Nivasa or Sri Vasa means that Krishna is the dwelling place, the abode of the goddess of fortune. So Krishna uses the same verb, nivasishasi. You will dwell in me alone. You will actually dwell in me alone. So superficially you may be in Ireland or wherever, Northern Ireland. Sorry about that. Don't want to start a riot here. So, but actually, if we are really dedicated to Krishna, we live in Krishna. We actually live in Krishna. So superficially, I'm living in this or that body, I'm living in this city or that town or this building, but actually we're living in Krishna. We're actually living in Krishna. That's real life. That's real happiness. That is real. And there's no other real happiness. We can, that's what you know, I guess you get older, it becomes more and more obvious. There's nothing else that can make us happy. I mean, there's so many neurotic rich people. I'm tempted to say probably most of them are neurotic. But anyway, there's so many people that have all these material things and, they're not real. I mean, who thinks they're happy? No one thinks they're happy. They don't think they're happy. And so the only happy, and of course then again, just being poor and miserable is not a guarantee of happiness either. So the only real happiness is living in Krishna, just being in Krishna. At every moment having the certainty, the confidence, the satisfaction of knowing that I'm doing what Krishna wants. I'm pleasing Krishna, therefore Krishna will protect me, Krishna will guide me, and I will achieve the perfection of life by following Krishna. And of course Krishna then here says, just to wrap this up, text 3, Ashadadhana Purusha, translated, those who are not faithful to this devotional service. It literally, it's actually a present participle grammatically in Sanskrit. So it literally says, those who are not trusting. In other words, like a continuous thing. Those who are not believing in me. Those who are not trusting me. It's actually the participle, as in English. Trusting. Those who are not trusting. Those who are not trusting of this process of bhakti yoga. Dharmasyasya. Those who are not trusting of it. In other words, I don't really believe that I'll be completely happy if I just please Krishna. Now, of course, obviously, Krishna wants you to eat healthy prasadam. Krishna wants you to serve according to your own nature. To trust fully in Krishna doesn't mean to perform unnatural, bizarre austerities that Krishna never asked you to perform. For example, Krishna says everywhere in the Bhagavad Gita that your duty comes from your nature. I mean, there was an immature, silly idea which was kind of dominated ISKCON in the early days, and still you can find it here and there, that if you're really surrendered to Krishna, then you sort of denature yourself. If you're really surrendered, you renounce your nature and you do the famous, celebrated, needful. So that if you have a preference, like, I like this kind of service, not that kind of service, then you're not really surrendered. Which is, of course, exactly the opposite of what Krishna says. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, 3:33, that Sadrasham cheshtate swasya prakritir jnanavanapi. Even an enlightened person acts in this world according to their own nature. And Krishna says, Prakritim janti bhutani. Creatures follow their nature. Nigraha kinkarishti. What will repression do? Krishna even says it's dangerous not to do your duty born of your nature. Because if you don't engage your nature, you do something else, your nature is going to pop out in some weird way, because, you know what I mean? It's like you don't have an outlet for it. It's like the sink. If your sink is plugged up and the water keeps coming, eventually, your bathroom is going to explode. And so that's the outlet. We have a nature. Our nature means that we're just wired in this life that we're going to act in certain ways. So the outlet for your nature, the outlet is your duty, which is born of your nature. And if you don't serve according to your own nature, it's going to end up, backfiring on you. God knows where it's going to come out. And that's why Krishna says it's dangerous not to honor your own nature. It's dangerous not to serve according to your own nature. So, that being said, so I'm not talking about some kind of bizarre austerity where you just never mind that you're intellectual, you should just polish cartels for the rest of your life or something. So our duty is born of our nature. But of course, Krishna is speaking in general terms. If you say, well, my nature is live in a beautiful house, and I don't want the climate to ever really go above, 27 degrees, and it shouldn't really go below maybe like 9 degrees, and I need a little babbling brook, and I need this, I need that, I've got, if you have like a list, so it's like about 397 parameters, and so, because that's my nature. That's not what Krishna's talking about. What Krishna's talking about, first of all, when he says your nature is the Varna system. Are you intellectual or priestly? Or are you, do you want to manage? Do you want to lead? Is your nature to govern? Do you want to go out there and do business? Is business your business, Are you entrepreneurial? Or do you want to do a farm? Or do you just want to, I just need to get a good job. I just need to work for somebody, because if I start my own business, it's not going to go very far. I'm not an intellectual. I don't want to be in charge of everything. I just want a good job and do my job and go home. So that's what Krishna is talking about. Also, of course, the ashram system. What's the best ashram for you? The one that works, basically. What's good, it's not that this ashram is better than that one. It's just whatever works. Just get the right one. The best ashram for you is the right one, according to your nature. So in that way, if we have a natural life, which Krishna urges you to have, then within that natural life, we should not be selfish. In other words, if it's my service, if it's my nature to preach, then I shouldn't say, well, I should go to that place to preach, but I won't go because I don't like the weather, I don't like the scenery, and, I like this kind of tree, and those trees don't grow in this place, so I'm not going to go preach there. Or, things like that. So if basically you're serving according to your nature, in terms of varna and ashram, you're serving according to your own nature, you're respecting your nature, then just do what you have to do to get the job done, to spread this movement. So it's actually a balance between respecting your own nature and engaging according to who you are, and at the same time being selfless and just doing what's best for Prabhupada. It's actually that balance. Anyway, Krishna says, one who literally is not trusting in this spiritual path, one who's not believing it. Aprapya mam, not achieving me, not reaching me. Achieving or reaching, not reaching me, not achieving me. Nivartante, not achieving me. They come back to the material world. They come back, mrityu samsara vartmani, on the path of, literally on the death path of repeated birth. Samsara means the cycle of reincarnation. And Krishna here and elsewhere in the Gita, actually, like in chapter 12, he calls it the path of death. Because if you think about it, when you reincarnate in this world, karne, of course, means flesh. You take on some more flesh. It's the path of death. Imagine a football game. Let's say one team is leading, first 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. They're winning. They're leading. Okay, it's the second, what do they call it? Second period? Second half? They're winning, but then the last few seconds, the other team got a couple goals and won. I mean, the fact that the other team was winning throughout the whole game means nothing. They just lost. And that's how history records it. They just lost. And so in the same way, in this world, we're struggling to stay alive, and so we're winning, we're alive, but final score, death. At the end of the game, that's what happens. Maya kicks a goal right in your head, and that's the final score. You lost. It doesn't matter that you were alive or you were winning for so long. Final score, you lost. So that's why Krishna calls it the path of death. So, of course, we all know we're eternal souls. Have any of you ever heard, since you joined this movement, have any of you ever heard that we're not the body? Of course, I mean, sometimes in certain communities you're not your body, but you are your clothes. Or if you're a woman, technically you are your body. But anyway, those are some of the idiosyncrasies of the Hare Krishna movement. It's king of all mysteries. Anyway, actually we are not our body, and or our clothes, although we should wear them. So that's the first 3 verses of Bhagavad Gita. And again, any questions on these points? Yes.
Just one thing about, Krishna comes to reestablish religious principles, and then in relation to, like the gambling match where Draupadi was disrobed, and these elders didn't object, like Bhishma. Was that a symptom of the degeneration of the age at that particular point?
Very much. Yeah, very much.
Otherwise, that wouldn't have happened
Yes.
previously.
In fact, Vidura stood up and said, if you are a member of a learned community or a responsible community, and you see injustice and don't speak up against it, you are guilty of that injustice. So Vidura is the only one who really stood up and told the truth. Bhisma got completely sidetracked by legal technicalities and missed, the real point, which is that this goddess is being offended. So yeah, very much a symptom of the fallen age. And Krishna says, I come when Dharma is collapsing, and Krishna came, so Dharma was collapsing. Therefore, if we look at the Mahabharata and think, oh, that's Vedic culture, well, remember what Krishna said, I come when Dharma's actually, Dharmasya glani, when there's serious trouble with Dharma. So the culture that we're looking at in the Mahabharata is a fallen culture. It's not pristine Vedic culture.
But it's very, like, with Yudhisthira gambling away his, you know, his whole kingdom and his wife. And
Yeah, interestingly, the Bhagavatam mentions 5 times the insult to Draupadi. And all 5 times says the offense to Draupadi was that the Kurus grabbed her hair. Interesting. And the Bhagavatam is the final authority. So what actually happened in the gambling hall? You know, it's interesting. Krishna says in the Mahabharata, actually, when Arjuna abducted Subhadra, actually he didn't abduct her, they eloped together. But when Arjuna and Subhadra, you know, went off together, and Balaram was angry, kind of Balaram's pastime, Krishna stood up in the Sudharma Assembly Hall, which is the Yadu Assembly Hall, and said, hey, look everybody, women are not property, you can't buy and sell women. And so the idea that you can gamble a human being is something which is definitely not a characteristic of a civilized society. As far as the Pandavas, anyway, if you look at the structure of feudal societies, the laws of feudal societies, military and political obligations are a negotiable instrument. For example, if I owe you money, then you can sell that debt, you can gamble that debt, you can auction the debt. It's a negotiable instrument. And in the society of Mahabharata, and even in Europe in previous times, a political or military obligation was negotiable. You could sell it, trade it, auction it, gamble it. And that, in my view, is what Yudhisthira actually did with his brothers. Not that, I mean, I don't believe in Vedic culture you can actually gamble human beings. And if you can, who would want Vedic culture? So if that's the case with the brothers, as far as Draupadi, again, Sripad Madhvacharya, the great Acharya, says that the Sanskrit text of the Mahabharata we have today is highly corrupted. The Bhagavatam 5 times mentions the offense to Draupadi, and all 5 times says the offense was grabbing her hair. To understand the importance of that, you have to understand the importance of symbolic anatomy in Vedic culture. For example, the feet, like the lotus feet, saying, I worship the lotus feet of the Guru, or I serve the feet of the Guru, doesn't mean you become the Guru's official pedicurist. It simply means that it's symbolic, because the feet are the lowest part of the body, and in earlier societies they don't have paved roads and cement sidewalks, and people actually walk on the earth. Your feet get kind of dirty. That's why if you're a certain age, it's like it's the best thing in the world someone wash your feet, because otherwise you're gonna break your back scrubbing your feet. So it's like really nice service. In modern society, we don't have the problem. We take showers, we have running water, and all this. But anyway, so serving the feet means, because the feet are the lowest part of the body, and similarly the greatest offense. Like if you see in Muslim countries, like the greatest offense, someone throws his shoes at someone else, seeing it on television, or kicking someone. And just as the feet are highly symbolic, either positive or negative, the feet are highly symbolic. So the head is the highest part of the body, and that's why twice you see Krishna symbolically killing someone simply by cutting their hair. I guess the dance is over. So So twice, for example, Krishna killed Rukmi, and I mean he cut Rukmi's hair, gave him kind of a punk haircut. And then also Arjuna cut Ashwatthama's hair. So imagine, in that culture, that was considered to be like killing them. In fact, the Bhagavatam even says that this is the way to kill a Brahmin, not physical killing. Because Ashwatthama, technically, and only technically, was a Brahmin. So, yes, so the anatomy, the human anatomy, had very powerful symbolic meaning in that culture, and also other cultures, if you look at other ancient cultures. So therefore, grabbing Draupadi's hair was a horrendous offense. The Bhagavatam says nothing about other offenses of Draupadi. And also, one of our great acharyas, Madhvacharya, says the Sanskrit text Mahabharata is corrupt. The Bhagavatam gives a somewhat different picture of what actually happened to Draupadi. And so I, think about those things, like what really happened. Yes.
Just when you were saying about everyone, important to act to your own nature in terms of service or what you do in your life, how can that best be achieved in a community setting where, it is reliant on different people pulling together and needing to fulfill a certain list of requirements? So how can that best be achieved if everyone is kind of somewhat selfishly needing to, for the positive of everyone else actually, but needing to fulfill their own nature, if those natures don't all add up? That's
a very good question.
Work?
We all can pitch in. It's not like if there's suddenly a fire breaks out. Sorry, my nature is not the fireman. I'm an intellectual. Obviously, in Sanskrit there is a term apad dharma. Apad means emergency or crisis. And so apad dharma means emergency dharma in special circumstances. So several times in the Bhagavatam it said you should never do something anapadi if it's not an emergency. But if it is an emergency, then so we all have to chip in. It's like a spiritual family. You all have to help out. But ultimately, one has to develop a career according to one's nature. Now, to some extent, a community, let's say in a particular place, is self-selecting. Because if someone is able to, let's say, stay and do the needful, they're happy, they're satisfied with their life, and that must mean to some extent it's natural for them. And there's also that, and there are devotees for whom it is natural and rewarding to sort of selflessly serve a community like this one. And for those people, that is their service, because that is their duty, because it's natural for them. And what we find is people for whom, just in the real world, people really feel, I can't do this, I want to serve the community, but I can't do these things, and they end up outside, the island, you could say. So I think it's just sort of water seeks its own level. But, like say around this particular community, if everyone who believes in this community or believes in a vision for this community and loves the deities, if everyone just did what they could, it would probably all add up to a successful community.
If you're in an environment where you get resistance from, say, management or lack of support to serve in your nature, how do you deal with that best?
Do you want to answer that one? I would say, people have to talk to each other. And again, in the real world, sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. We don't want to just spend the rest of our life fighting with people. And so, the people, let's say the leaders have to try to accommodate people, the other devotees have to try to help the community. So everyone has to try to do their best. If you feel in your heart that Krishna wants me to participate in this community, if you feel that's how Krishna is inspiring me, I really believe in this and I want to help, then there should be dialogue and try to work things out. Obviously, there has to be a balance. The community may have certain needs, but you have certain needs.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be a balance. It can't just be like, okay, I want everything that I want, or the community wants everything it wants. There has to be, because if you ask the question, who are we? I know we're spirit soul, but as human beings, and devotees used to pretend we're not really human beings. I mean, we're not. We're spirit soul, but we have a human nature. And Krishna himself says in the Gita, you can't practice bhakti yoga unless you respect your human nature. For example, he says you can't eat too much or too little, you can't sleep too much or too little. Obviously, it's not the soul that gets materially hungry or tired, it's the body. And yet Krishna says you can't practice bhakti yoga unless you respect your human nature. You don't identify with it, but you have to work with it intelligently. So in that sense, we are both private and public. We are individual and we're social. We're both. It's Veda Veda. This is another case of Veda Veda. So the individual has to be satisfied. Krishna is right there in the Bhagavad Gita. Read it and weep. It's right there in the Bhagavad Gita that we must serve according to our nature, and yet also the nature of community life is we have to cooperate. And so it's really the balance. It can't go all the way to this side or that side. I mean, if a community ignores the individual needs and aspirations and nature of the members, then why even have a community if it's only to frustrate people? On the other hand, an individual can't think that my only duty is to myself. If we have been nourished by a community, if we've gotten significant spiritual benefit from a community, then there's also an obligation to help that community. So it's like a social contract. So I think it's a question of balance. And of course, ultimately, you're an adult, and ultimately you have to decide whether you can have a happy spiritual life in a particular situation. And the leaders have to see whether they're able to facilitate a happy life for you in that situation. And everyone has to be a good sport, team player, unselfish, and just see what can be done. Hope I answered your question.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't always pan out like that, but it makes sense.
No, it doesn't, and therefore, there are very few, frankly, probably the overwhelming majority of devotees are not presently living in the first place they ever met devotees. As we know, people, devotees go all over the place. But still, again, we're private and we're public. We're individual and we're social. So we have to, yes.
Do you think with great power becomes diminishing spirituality?
With great power.
Comes diminishing spirituality. Could that be a link?
Well, Spider-Man's Uncle Uvacha. With great power comes great responsibility. How we respond to power, like, does it literally empower us to do more service? Does it ruin us? It depends on how strong we are spiritually. It's like a ratio. If I get more power than I can spiritually handle, then I will be corrupted. As they say, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Saffron power never corrupts, it just leads to glory and large donations. So really, it's just like you should only eat as much as you can digest in a healthy way, and so
that doesn't often happen, especially in the Sundays. So it tends to not human beings when we struggle to know when to stop, when enough is enough. And
I know.
I think we do tend.
And as soon as I figure that one out, you'll be the first to know. So, but as far as power. It really depends on how Krishna conscious a person is. And if a person, you could say, for example, you could imagine a situation where someone is afraid of being corrupted and accepts less power than they could handle. So they won't take responsibility. They can be responsibility averse and not do as much as they could. Or someone can take more power than they can really handle. In other words, in that case, it's not that in the natural course of things, Krishna just gave you certain responsibility. But we see sometimes someone, so-called Vaishnava, is ambitious and kind of maneuvers. I mean, I've seen that. I've seen people maneuver their way into basically every possible leader position in ISKCON, including guru, sannyasi, GBC. I don't mean to say they're all bad. Most of them are good. But but some people are ambitious. And it's kind of obvious, and it's not very pretty when you see it. And we see some people, it's supposed to be a spiritual movement. That's like what the sign says. It's supposed to be a spiritual movement, and so I'm not talking about Ireland right now, because I just got here, and I'm still hoping to get donations and good food and all that, so I don't want to, wear out my welcome. So I'm speaking in general in the world. This is not about Ireland. I just happen to be here right now. And that is, you can see sometimes. We can definitely see some people where power has gone to their heads. You can see some people that have power and just don't treat other people nicely. They're supposed to be spiritual leaders, but they're not even nice human beings. So as I say, you not only have to be a good devotee, you have to be a good person. Because some people are good devotees, they're just not good people.
Do you think, just as the Kshatriyas have to kind of have their own agenda and the Brahmins their own, that actually really the most beneficial would be that the management deal with the management, and then ultimately the management has to actually go through the Brahmins, who are the kind of the behind the scenes pujaris that are actually dealing directly with Krishna and things like that?
Interesting question. These are interesting issues. There's a few complications here. In academics, they say problematize an argument. So one problem is, and it's not your problem, it's just the world we live in. But one problem is that because we live in an industrial and post-industrial society, it's very difficult to apply the varnas. And sometimes we always have varnashram, dharma conferences, and they get all the Prabhupada quotes out. But the real problem is very simple. The person that actually explained why we can't institute the varnas is Bhakta Karl, Karl Marx, who said that he was a Vaishnava, he just didn't know it. Because he said, one of the famous slogans of Karl Marx is the means of production determine social and political relationships. That's not a direct quote, but it's paraphrased. For example, if you look at hunting-gathering tribes, if you hunt and gather, well, not you, but let's say a group of people hunt and gather, you can only hunt so much. If you go into some forest, there's only so many animals in the forest, and therefore you can't come into the forest with a tribe of 10,000 people, because about 9,500 of them are going to starve very quickly. Or if you're just gathering nuts and berries, there just aren't that many nuts and berries. So hunting gathering societies tend to be very small scale. They tend to be very small scale. And because they're very small scale, not many people, you can't have a division of labor okay, I'm in a little hunting-gathering tribe, I think I'm going to be a dentist. That's what I'm going to do. Everyone has to do everything. There's not enough people for someone to be a dentist and someone, no, I'm an artist. I'm an artist. No. Everyone has to do everything. There's not that many people, and there's not that many people because the way you get food, you can't feed a lot of people. And so then, scholars always talk about the great agrarian revolution. People start to plant, because especially grains. This is not meat production, which is still, it's a mess in many ways. But if you produce grains, for one thing, you can keep grains. They'll store. And therefore, you can accumulate huge amounts of grain, and you can have cities. You can have large populations. When you have large populations, you can have division of labor. So some people can just be artists. And because you have people that can simply be artists, they're really good at it. Whereas in hunting and gathering, you get very primitive art, which only, certain art critics could like. So, but then you get people specialized. You get philosophers, you get artists, you get legal systems, you get warriors, you get professional warriors, you get professional governors, you get all kinds of things. Because your food supplies can sustain a large-scale population, therefore you can have division of labor. Now when you have industrial revolution, everything changes again. Because and the Varna system presupposes or is based on an agrarian economy. And in agrarian economies, you have huge extended families, which provides a tremendous amount of cultural stability because it's like everyone you know is telling you got to do something. So now with the Industrial Revolution, if people go to cities, because you have factories, you have a lot of workers, you have capital, it's not just grains, so if you live in a city, the more children you have, or even in a village, if you just, if you're not a farmer, the more children you have, the poorer you are, basically. Real world stuff. The more children you have, the less money you have. If you live on a farm, the more children you have, the more wealth you have. Because on a farm, you can engage an unlimited number of people in the land. So therefore, when society switches over to capitalism, to industrial economy, you get the dissolution of the extended family, which basically breaks down the system of cultural stability, and so you get everything's changing. And because you get these very large-scale populations, you get technology, and it's just everything just goes crazy. But one of the results of that is that, let's say you're a teacher by nature, and say you're a Brahmani, but in modern society, you have to be employed. Some school district has to hire you. But if you're an employee, you're a Shudra, but you're a teacher, so you're a Brahmana. And so it just goes crazy. What do you do if you're a Kshatriya? There are no jobs for Kshatriyas. If you're a Kshatriya, and you could say, well, you can be a politician, but politicians are just, sleazy, what they are. Because nowadays politicians have to get votes from the people. That means that, they have to kiss the, that means they have to, somehow placate Shudras. They have to just somehow rather please and get the mercy of Shudras. And if you're in the army, let's say you're a general, then you have to serve under these politicians. So therefore, where are the Brahmin jobs? Where are the Kshatriya jobs? The whole thing has sort of gone crazy.
It's not black and white.
It's just a mess. So therefore, going back to Marx, the means of production, in other words, the way a society feeds itself, the way a society acquires and stores riches and so on, determines political and social relationships. So let's go back to a Hare Krishna temple or a Hare Krishna community. First of all, Kshatriyas don't manage Brahmins. But if someone is, let's say, managing a temple, that's not really a Kshatriya. Is that really a Kshatriya activity? I mean, some people, and I've seen temple presidents who really just are like Vaishyas. They just make money. They don't treat people properly. They don't, I'm not talking about Ireland, not about Ireland, I swear to God. But I've seen, I swear on, 1 year of Mahaprasadam. But, you get some people, because, okay, let's talk about the real world, right? In the real world, if you look at every religion on earth, every religion in history, some people rise to positions of leadership in a religious institution because they make money, or they're good managers, not because they're so spiritual. And some people become leaders because they are very spiritual. There are some leaders who really are advanced in Krishna consciousness, and some who are just advanced in management and they're not spiritually advanced. So it's not that because someone is in a high position that they're spiritually advanced, or it doesn't mean they're not advanced. We have to judge by the symptoms. So if you say, so therefore I don't think we can simply say that people that manage temples are Kshatriyas and the people that just study Shastra are Brahmins. It's a little more complicated. Take Prabhupada, for example. I'll throw one more factor here on the table, and then we'll get out the cards and chips and So, and that is, Prabhupada himself, if you look at Prabhupada's own example, he obviously was a spiritual leader, and at the same time he kind of managed things. He didn't want to manage things, but no one else could do it. But still, Prabhupada kind of identified with that. And of course it corresponds, if you look sociologically, sociology of religion, it corresponds to the very early initial stage in the development of a new religious institution. It's not sustainable. But still, for example, when I took sannyas in 1972, 45 years ago, I took sannyas at the age of 4. The youngest sannyasa actually in Vaishnava history. I was a little older. Anyway, it was 1972. But I took sannyas, and then I wrote Prabhupada a letter, and I said, well, Prabhupada, now that I've taken sannyas, no more management, I can just preach, because I'd been a temple president, Grihastha temple president. And Prabhupada wrote back and said, who told you this nonsense? He said, you do like me. In the morning I give the Bhagavatam class, in the afternoon I go to the bank. And so it's interesting that Prabhupada sort of identified with this model, because that's what he did. He came to New York, and he had to talk to lawyers and set up ISKCON, and he had to build an institution. And so, for example, Prabhupada sent me to Latin America. He personally asked me to be GBC of Latin America, and it went very, very well, and Prabhupada really liked that. He loved the fact that I was, the preacher, I was a spiritual leader there under him, but at the same time, I was organizing things, printing books, organizing farms, schools. And so, and here's a very interesting point. I mean, ISKCON has a lot of mythological history, but since I, kind of studied history, I try to get the real history. If you look at the real history of ISKCON, when Prabhupada was, 1977, when he was preparing to leave this world, and he named 11 people to continue the guru thing. I call them the Fab 11, like the Fab 4, Beatles. Anyway, so when Prabhupada named these 11 people, what's very interesting is he only named people, or almost exclusively named, practically exclusively named people who, were preaching, understood the philosophy, but also who were managing or leading projects. For example, I was in charge of Latin America, and what's interesting is Prabhupada did not name a single guru who was just a Brahmin. Now, I'm not saying that's sustainable. In fact, I think that, ISKCON has certain problems that need to be addressed, because sociologically, Hare Krishna. We going? Sociologically, as you say, sociology, religion, routinization of charisma.
Sorry?
Oh, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, sociologically speaking, if you look at the history of religions, as a religious institution gets settled and organized and develops administrative structures, you can't always continue that style that Prabhupada had. But still, Prabhupada did not choose any, you could say, people who were simply Brahmins. They were learned in Shastra, they were austere. Like Krishna says in the Gita, Vidya Vinaya Sampane, Brahmane, a Brahmin who is learned and humble. And he didn't name any people like that to be gurus. He named people who in his mind sort of were following his way of doing it. They were preaching but also organizing. Again, I'm not saying that's the future, because we're going through new sociological stages. But still, so you put all these things together, I think it's complex. It's not just that, okay, people that manage in ISKCON are Kshatriyas, people that just study and preach are Brahmanas. It's a little more complex than that. And also because Kshatriyas didn't manage Brahminical institutions. I mean, obviously Kshatriyas don't manage Brahmins. And so if a temple, by definition, let's say has, well, theoretically, let's say if a temple has Brahmins, then how could anyone manage it? How could anyone manage it? Because you don't manage Brahmins. Now, if you look at what European monastic traditions, or even Asian Buddhist monastic traditions, in a monastery, whether it's Buddhist or Christian or whatever it is, usually one of the monks manages. Just like in the Catholic Church, you have cardinals and bishops that manage the church. Of course, it's a mess, but still, that's the way it is. So, but even look at a monastery. I mean, to the extent that a monastery is analogous to a temple, and it's not completely, because monasteries are more secluded, they're not so much focused on preaching. But, so if you can make a rough analogy, it's not a precise analogy, but if you make a rough analogy with a monastery, then they don't bring in a kshatriya to manage a monastery. One of the monks manages the monastery. You have like a head monk. So you could say, the people that manage temples, if those people themselves are practicing sadhana bhakti, if the people that manage temples actually get up in the morning at a reasonable hour, and they're practicing sadhana bhakti, then you can't really call them kshatriyas, because kshatriyas don't live in temples and don't manage temples. So in a sense, we have to work these things out. And one of the reasons there may be sometimes confusion or conflict is because it hasn't been fully worked out. Yes?
As this just come back a bit when you were saying about like division of labour and kind of like a kind of Marxist model. Tony's was saying again this division between the agrarian and the new model of kind of clustered industrial communities, where actually we're taking a community that's more generic, more organic from the agrarian society, which is kind of like the model that we have in ISKCON, where people are saying we all go and we live happily ever after in the countryside and have a model farm. And that,
well, that's only in our magazine.
yeah, but that rarely happens. but then we also, because we have this thing that Prabhupada built a house the whole world can live in, and certainly when I was young, we joined the utopian vision of ISKCON that we all would be in growing old and saggy and grey in the temple. And basically speaking, you end up living with people who are very diverse, and the diverse natures, diverse skills. So it's more like the opposite side of that is the community of need, because you're having to do the needful, as that saying was. But you're learning how to have to get on and do all these different roles. So where do you get the balance between, within our society, of this kind of utopian agrarian family in the countryside, and actually you've got all these diverse people?
Okay, a few points. 2 points I'll make. Number one, it's very, very difficult. It's extremely difficult to set up an autonomous alternative economy. In other words, like devotees, we actually do radical things like we buy cars and put gas in them. I mean, it's not that we produce our own cars and, produce our own petroleum. And so we're really dependent on the outside economy. Similarly, in truly agrarian economies, the price of labor is extremely cheap. Prabhupada told me that, he told me one time when he was a young householder, he had a servant named Jagdish, and Prabhupada's wife would just give him, paid him something, but it wasn't that much, and some vegetables, and so like everything is to scale. Like, how much does it cost for fencing? How much does it cost for cows? How much does it cost for veterinarians? For animal feed? For hiring people to help in the farm? The cost of everything is scaled way down because it's an agrarian economy. But if you have an economy where everything done in the farm is just a commercial product, and they kill the cows because they can make more money that way, and so the farms are competing with the factories because it's an open economy, and therefore the cost of so to have a self-sufficient community, to really create entirely your own little bubble economy, is extremely difficult. Because normally, any community, any village, any little community depends on the outside world in many ways. Even if you look at so-called self-sufficient, communities, Vedic or Europe or anywhere, they trade. I mean, it's not that they literally produce everything. They actually trade for other things. Even if you read the Mahabharata, the Rajasuya sacrifice, when all the kings of the world were bringing tribute to Yudhishthira, they were bringing imported items from different countries, and that was cool. Wow, this is an imported item. And so trade, unless you have a very, very simple economy, and we're not really going to give up everything from the modern world and try to go back 1,000 years in time. And so we live within an industrial, post-industrial, modern economy. It's hard to totally create our own. There's another point, and that is Another reason why a community like this one is difficult to maintain. I mean, again, I admire the devotees who are working here. I think you're really, it's very admirable what you're doing for Krishna. The issue here is that if you look at how Prabhupada established rural communities, he did it in a certain sequence. Like if you're building a model airplane, you got to put this piece first, and that. If you're building let's say an engine, you can't just throw all the pieces together. You have to put things together in a certain sequence. It's like when you're cooking. If it says like, okay, first cook the rice, then add this. You can't first add this, then things are done in sequence. And so Prabhupada's sequence was he established a very powerful urban preaching movement. He established a powerful urban preaching movement, and then he got land. And what that meant was that when we got land, we had resources, human resources, financial resources. We had the power to advertise rural projects so that millions of people knew about it. And in Prabhupada's system, the rural projects depended upon the urban preaching. As we know, the urban preaching, at least compared to what it was, collapsed for various historical reasons. And I believe that rural projects will not really flourish in ISKCON until we go back and do what Prabhupada did. So if you're building a house, you first put down the foundation, and then you start building the walls, and the foundation caves in. You don't just keep building the walls. You've got to go back and do the foundation again. So in that sense, it seems to me to really sustain natural living in the modern world, Prabhupada's system was to have the rural communities supported by, in many ways, powerful urban preaching programs. Now, as far as why our ISKCON's urban preaching programs are not doing that well, which they're not, all over the Western world, I've written a lot of papers about that. I started a project called Krishna West, and which is wildly popular with many of the senior leaders of our movement. Prabhupada said philosophy and religion. Now, what did Prabhupada mean by that? There's a widespread misunderstanding, actually, among devotees, that when Prabhupada said religion and philosophy, he meant, serve Krishna and memorize our teachings. So if you serve Krishna and memorize our teachings, you have combined religion and philosophy. That's not actually what Prabhupada meant. If you read what I actually looked it up in the database. And what Prabhupada actually meant was, he meant philosophy in the same way the real world uses it. In other words, you should be serving Krishna, but at the same time have the ability to reason, to do research, to give valid arguments, to analyze the arguments of other people. Just the ability to be rational. The ability to be rational. And I believe I've proved, in my humble opinion, you all can see for yourselves that I'm a very humble person. So I believe that I have demonstrated with sound logic and evidence that if we are really to restore a powerful Western preaching mission, we must do what acharyas have done from the beginning of time, that is adapt in various ways. Adapt does not mean changing our basic principles, doesn't mean changing our philosophy, doesn't mean changing the way we practice bhakti yoga, but in certain superficial, variable ways, it means we have to adapt. And whether you are a religious movement or a large woolly mammoth, if you don't adapt to your environment, you will go extinct. It's just the way it is. So anyway, go to H.D.Goswami.com. Please make sure you have with you a major credit card. So, anyway, that's what I'm doing, as Prabhupada said, making my propaganda. We have to restore powerful, there's an old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we restore a powerful preaching mission in the West, all of our rural communities will flourish, and everybody will be happy. And we actually have to think. Finally, there's one story. Giriraj Swami, my godbrother, who we were buddies ever since 1970. We met in Boston. We were brahmacharis, and he tells this very powerful story. Toward the end of Prabhupada's stay here in this world, Giriraj was in Vrindavan with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada sent a servant to call Giriraj in the middle of the night. He went running to Prabhupada's room. It was very dark, just a little candle. And Giriraj sat there wondering, like, what's up? Prabhupada called him. Prabhupada's body was so weak, Prabhupada had to whisper into his ear what Prabhupada wanted to say. And he said, when I leave this world, will my movement go on? Now, the way Giriraj tells the story, he kind of gave the company line. He just gave the standard stock, off-the-shelf answer. He said, yes, Prabhupada, if we chant Hare Krishna and follow the principles. In other words, it's just automatic. You just, follow the principles, chant Hare Krishna, everything will happen. Prabhupada indicated no. He said there must be intelligence. There must be, in other words, not just automatic things like you just dress a certain way, go out on certain streets, jump up and down, chant Hare Krishna, and the world will surrender, even though nothing indicates it right now, but it's a prophecy. What Prabhupada indicated is that we actually have to be smart. We actually have to be intelligent, and we have to organize properly. And so, if you study the history of world religions, if you ask the simple question, which is never asked, amazingly enough, no one ever asked this question, as far as I know in the Hare Krishna movement, and that is, if you study history, social science, how does a small religious movement become a world religion? I mean, that's obviously the question, right? But no one ever asks it. So, Prabhupada also says in his purport to the Bhagavatam 1.5.22 that human society, well, it's right here, let me read it to you. Prepare yourselves. And then after I read this, you can all rush the speaker's seats with your donations and pledges of lifelong service. So, I'm just kidding. So, 1.5.22, that's a famous verse, Idang hi pungsas. Prabhupada writes, Hare Krishna. And this is on the point of Giriraj's story that no, it's not automatic. What we're, it's interesting. Can the world really be saved involuntarily? In other words, if you read Bhagavad Gita, do you find Krishna manipulating Arjuna, tricking him? Or do you find Krishna rationally teaching, persuading Arjuna, giving good arguments, and then asking Arjuna, well, what do you think? That's the Bhagavad Gita. It's not that we can go out on the street, even if people don't like our presentation, it doesn't matter, we're manipulating them. They don't even know what's happening to them. We have the power to kind of twist their minds and bring them to Krishna even against their will, even if they don't want to come, because we have that power to control them through Agyata Sukriti. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita 17:28, last verse in the 17th chapter, any religious activity that someone performs without really believing in what they're doing has very little effect in this life or the next. That's what Krishna says. So if you're out on Harinam and you're chanting and people are walking by and they don't really believe in what you're doing, of course, Prabhupada said, Agyata Sukriti, there's some benefit. How much benefit? Prabhupada actually wrote me a letter in 1971 when I was a Grihastha temple president. I was a Grihastha. And Prabhupada wrote me a letter. Prabhupada wrote me a letter and said, we don't engage in mental speculation, but we do engage in philosophical speculation. And what's the difference? He gave an example. Krishna says, Rasoham apsu kunte, I'm the taste of water. If you question, is that true or not, that's mental speculation. If you accept Krishna's statement, but you ask, how is it true? What does that mean? That Prabhupada said is philosophical speculation, and he told me I should do that. So Prabhupada talks about agyata sukriti, unknown good deed. So I accept it. But I have the God-given right to ask, how much benefit is there? How much benefit is there? And what Krishna says in the Gita, not much. So this idea that People don't need to be persuaded. We don't need to persuade people. People don't need to participate in their own salvation. Because we can manipulate them. It's not working. So, you may want to wait another half century or a few centuries or maybe a millennium just to make sure, it has plenty of time to percolate. But Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, don't hold your breath. Again, there's some benefit, but not that much. And so what Prabhupada indicated was we actually have to be intelligent. It's interesting, when devotees open restaurants, they're really concerned to offer the public food the public will pay for. But since people don't pay for Harinam, it's like take it or leave it. If we ran our restaurants the way we run our Harinam, we'd be out of business in every restaurant. Because on Harinam, we actually don't care that much what they think. If they think it's weird, think it's strange, they can't identify with it, it doesn't matter. It's automatic. They don't need to participate in their own salvation. We'll manipulate them for their own good. They're too stupid to know what's good for them. Great attitude. So, in chapter 6 of the Nectar of Devotion, we actually have a list of fundamental principles you can't change and variable details you can. If someone thinks, there's another deviation, no, I've written papers on that, which I've proved by logic and evidence from Prabhupada that what we're doing in Krishna West is not a deviation, and I've even analyzed all the previous historical deviations, and this is completely different. Because in fact, we are preserving everything that Prabhupada said we had to preserve, which are three things: our philosophy, our practice, and our institution. We preserve all three of those. And what are we adjusting? Things that Prabhupada said you can and should adjust. So, religion and philosophy. If everything else fails, think. Thinking is not sinful. And anyway, if you like, we'll send you these papers. But I'm just concerned, before I leave this world, I would like to do everything possible to help revive Prabhupada's Western mission. Prabhupada very mercifully gave me a lot of attention. He somehow believed and actually said many times that I was very intelligent, which I didn't think, but he said it. And therefore he would often just confide in me. He would often just talk to me. And Prabhupada gave me a very clear vision of what he wanted for his Western mission. And it's a powerful, relevant movement. It's not this little ethnic thing off in a corner of society that no one really cares about. That's not at all what Prabhupada had in mind. So the real issue is here, how do we restore a powerful Western mission? Because if we don't do that, then the rest is just kind of like, we're just quarreling among ourselves over trivial details while the world goes to hell. Yes, Maheshwara, and then her grace. His grace, then her grace. Then my divine grace.
I'm asking this question on behalf of someone else who didn't want to ask the question.
Okay.
In relation to your point about establishing a powerful Hare Krishna movement and the enthusiasm of the devotees to do so. So their point was that they're not feeling enthused to do that because of the history that disenthuses them of, and they mentioned some examples of, the gurus falling down, or child abuse, or social problems within the movement, for one thing or another, making the point that the devotees are generally disenthused to continue with that enthusiastic movement to
Okay, as far as gurus falling down, not all of them fell down. And so why don't they work with me? And what's their excuse there? Maybe after a hard day preaching, take a little drink and a cigar, but actually, just kidding. That was really a joke. Why don't I'm proposing a plan. It's a logical plan based in history, social science, Prabhupada, Shastra, for restoring the Western mission. What's their excuse with me? And plus, the Guru's falling down, we're talking about something that happened not 40 years ago, 35 years ago. Are people just looking for an excuse? not to serve Prabhupada? Or what? Secondly, as far as the child abuse, God, I hate to praise myself. I'm just going to keep doing it. But actually, I was GBC in Brazil, and we had a large-scale Gurukula that had the best record in the world regarding child abuse. Not that it had the most child abuse. It had the least. So, again, we have to be mature. If you look at the history of new religious movements, they go through growing pains. So we should, and as far as now, the situation now, so saying I won't serve Prabhupada, I'm not going to try to help other conditioned souls because 30 years ago something happened. Does that sound right to you? We've learned something. We're much more mature. Back then, ISKCON was just, when Prabhupada left and I became a big guru, I was 29 years old. How old are you now?
49.
Thank you for doing it. So, you're 20 years older than I was when I became a guru. So, it was a new movement. Everyone was young. No one knew what they were doing. Now we have adults. It's a different world now. So should we abandon the world? Should we abandon Prabhupada because 30 years ago something happened? I'm not going to do that. You can do it if you want, but I'm not. Because I want to get Prabhupada's mercy. I want to help Prabhupada. And I'm not just going to look for excuses not to help him. Another thing, actually it's interesting, there's a quote from Prabhupada where he says devotees are losing their enthusiasm because they're not given enough freedom. And so this movement has to be encouraging everyone that's willing to step up to create a program, to do something, to go out and preach. Prabhupada said that if it's too centralized, if a few bureaucrats or managers tell everybody else what to do, he said that would ruin his movement. Obviously there has to be structure. It can't be anarchy or chaos. But as a leader, whatever, so-called leader, I'm always trying to encourage other people, including you or others, to go out and become leaders. When Prabhupada sent me to Latin America, I was the only GBC, and within several years, there were 5 GBCs there. Why? Because it grew so fast. I was constantly looking for leaders, not followers. I'm not looking for followers. I'm looking for leaders. And actually, if all the leaders in ISKCON were looking for leaders, in other words, if I have a project and I see someone that maybe doesn't perfectly fit in because they have their own ideas, that's not a problem. That's an opportunity. It's like maybe that person actually has leadership ability. Maybe they could go out and do another project, create another preaching program. So I've seen that. Again, this is not about Ireland. Just got here. And no, really, because I don't want to get involved in local things. But for the last 45 years I've seen this. Prabhupada, I took sannyas 45 years ago, and then Prabhupada made me GBC. That was 43 years ago. So I've been a senior leader in ISKCON for almost half a century, and I've seen too many times that a leader wants to keep people under him. In other words, he wants to stay, rather than trying to push other people forward. So, if all of us, whenever we see any sign of talent, of creativity, that someone has some leadership ability, just create a program for them. Give them an opportunity. Find a way to let them grow. And if everyone's doing that, then, the ISKCON will grow. Did you want to pursue your point?
No, but...
Do you want to give a donation?
I can't answer for that person.
But you can speak for yourself.
I think freedom to me is an essential point.
It is for Prabhupada.
Yeah, and
That verse you have on the board here. If you read Prabhupada's purport, he says there is no devotional service without freedom.
Love requires freedom. To not love.
To what?
Love requires freedom to not love.
Yeah, and to serve Krishna. Devotees have to have freedom. But then again, a mature devotee will pursue their own freedom without disturbing others, or without. So, I mean, like myself, I created this project, and for example, in Krishna West, one of our rules is we don't bother temples. We don't try to change temples. We don't tell other projects what to do. We have our own projects. So if I see, I mean, I tried in 2003, I was made GBC of Atlanta because the temple was, anyway, a disaster, and so we kind of fixed it up, fixed everything up. And I thought then, it was like sort of an Indian congregation, also Western, but strong Indian congregation. And I thought then we can change this into a state-of-the-art Western preaching thing. But it was very naive on my part. So I learned my lesson. Don't try to change other projects. Don't try to tell everybody else what to do. If you have a community, it has its own roots, its own customs and traditions, there's leaders doing things a certain way, why just fight with them? It's just a waste of time. I thought I'd go do my own project. And so therefore in Krishna West, everyone that wants to work with me, no one's bothering temples, no one's fighting to tell temples what to do. We just go out and create projects, and we preach, and we make devotees. So what's really needed is to create a powerful Western Hare Krishna movement within ISKCON. Prabhupada once told me, when devotees fight among themselves, it's Maya's special trick. It's like the world's going to hell, and the devotees are like, firing at each other. I'm not going to fight for the temples, whatever. I'm not fighting, I'm not trying to change them, I'm not trying to take them over, I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just creating my own projects, inviting people who are interested to help. Anything else? Nothing? The peanut gallery? Yes.
Actually, if you're saying earlier, like one's duty depends on their nature.
Yes.
And it's more about how they think and their inclination. And with that, also, could we also assume that not necessarily if you are a woman that you should be a mother if you're not wired.
That what? If you're a woman, then?
A woman's body.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily have to be a mother if you're not wired to be one.
Of course not. That's crazy. Every woman, like every man, has a freedom to follow their own nature. You can't force someone to be like everybody else. It's everyone's personal choice. Yeah, I mean, I've heard so many stories like this. Like, why are there so many people that think they have to tell everybody else what to do? Everyone, has to live their own life. Most women like to be mothers, and some women don't. And the women that just aren't inclined that way are not inferior or less. They're not better or worse than anyone else. They have a right to follow their own natures.
And it's not like they're going against foreign.
They're not. Oh God, no. This is the movement for Krishna consciousness, not for Hindu Dharma. I mean, the whole point is we want to love Krishna and serve Krishna. Krishna says you have a right. The only time in the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna uses the word right, as in the sense of like human rights, the only time he says that is you have a right to do your own duty. And he says again and again and again, your duty is born of your nature. So no one has a right to try to stop someone from serving according to their own nature. It's obnoxious. I mean, if you see someone that like has all kinds of psychological things that they really want something but they won't admit it, whatever. But everyone has a right to serve Krishna according to their own nature. I mean, to be perfectly honest, when I travel around, go to temples, see devotees, it's unbelievable the things that are said in classes. It's unbelievable, like what devotees tell people. It's like it's crazy things. I mean, just all this crazy. I mean, of course, occasionally there's also just normal preaching. But it's like unbelievable how many silly things people say are Vedic culture. That I joined ISKCON because I wanted a spiritual science. I mean, how scientific is it to say there are these dangerous, like malevolent beings flying around the universe, and when you chant Gayatri, they're actually going to, fly across the universe, fly through your right hand into your subtle body and steal all your pious work. But fortunately, they bounce off cotton. So if you just put a little piece of cotton over your hand, they'll just like, bing, they'll bounce off it. Or they can penetrate right hands, but not left hands. So if you put your left hand over, then, they'll bounce off. They bounce off left hands in cotton, but penetrate right hands. I mean, holy cow. I mean, there's so many pictures of Prabhupada chanting Gayatri, sort of like, boldly exposing his right hand to all these flying little creatures. And another one I really love is that you can't go on the altar with sewn clothing, even though Prabhupada did, and there's so many pictures of Prabhupada doing it. So I'm still waiting for someone to give me a scientific explanation of what is polluting about, thread. I'm still waiting. Actually, one devotee told me in the last country I went to that, this was great. He said, because when you wear sewn clothing, you think you're better than God. Which is actually scientific, because every time I put a shirt on, I become an egomaniac, Like, no shirt, I'm a humble Vaishnava. Shirt, egomaniac. Right? I mean, all of you probably had experience. You put a shirt on, you go crazy. I mean, this kind of stuff is being preached. We really need to get back to a simple, pure spiritual science. And a movement, like Prabhupada said, where we are all encouraging each other to take responsibility. We're encouraging each other to be leaders. Create your program. Do something. Everyone cooperate. Don't bother other devotees. Don't disturb other programs. But everyone should have the chance to be a leader. Everyone should have the chance to create a program and make their contribution. So it's getting back to a spiritual science. It's getting back to Prabhupada's real program. Prabhupada emphasized that we have to encourage people, respect their individual natures, let them, if you want to create a program, if you want to be a leader, you can do that in ISKCON. You just have to respect other people and projects.
I
Yes?
just want the clarification.
Sure.
Is Krishna West under the umbrella of ISKCON?
Yeah. I mean, that's been settled years ago, but
I just didn't know.
No, I know, and most people don't know, because it's funny, in this digital age, I mean, it's just, there's some kind of cloud that hangs over us. I've said like 1 trillion times, slight exaggeration, that, the ISKCON project, the GBC acknowledged that it's an ISKCON project, and yet still everybody's asking, is this an ISKCON project? Which shows that despite all the digital technology, it's still a kind of stone age for communications. I mean, if you think it, I mean, I say something over and over again, everyone says it, it's in our website, and yet no one knows it. And yet they do know that, flying creatures penetrate your right hand but not your left hand. I mean, the amount of superstition, the amount of mythology. By mythology, I don't mean Krishna and the soul. I mean other things. It's just, if we could somehow or other present a rational, intelligent, spiritual science in Ireland or everywhere else, I think that people would accept it. Back there. Yes, young man.
Maharaj, in society or in the general world, we see that, for example, in political society, we see that people gain traction by criticism and fault finding. It seems to be the kind of accepted way in which people make progress by criticizing, fault finding, undermining people in their activities. And what role, if any, does that have in a spiritual society?
Well, I mean, people also achieve progress by coming up with great products and services.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for example, Apple computers became a success not by, backbiting, they just came out with a great product. And there's all kinds of people that do that. I mean, successful restaurants, or there's all kinds of successful people that just do something well. And so, the extent to which we're not getting a higher taste, the extent to which we're not really in the fire of Prabhupada's preaching mission, which is it's not a stereotype thing. It's not you got to like run out on the street and sell people things. I mean, there's many different ways to preach. There's many different ways. Everyone can preach in their own way, according to their own nature. But if I'm really ecstatic, if I love my service, if I love what I'm doing for Prabhupada, I don't want to get involved with, criticizing other people. If I see an ISKCON project, frankly, that I think is going nowhere and is not going to go anywhere because I think it's a wrong approach, that's their problem. I'm going to try to create a better, not to put them down, not because I hate them or I think we just have to create great projects. We need to create a powerful Western Hare Krishna movement. We need people to step forward and take responsibility, be leaders, and actually take seriously social science and history about how you go about that. If we think that we can present a very exotic foreign culture in Ireland or England or America or Canada, and the Western people are going to be culturally colonized by us, we are seriously delusional. I'm not saying to change our basic programs or spiritual practices, but culture is like water. It flows down, not up. And that means cultures that are perceived as being, cultures that are perceived as being more prestigious, I don't mean they are, I don't mean objectively they're better, but at the present time, Western culture is almost universally perceived as having enormously more status than India. Enormously. And that's why you find Indians migrating all over the Western world, and you find very, very, very few Western people going to India to live permanently. I mean, we could objectively study these things. This is not opinion, these are facts based on statistics of international tourism, immigration, based on facts, for example, of how many people study foreign languages in American universities, and it turns out that very few people learn Indian languages. It's just the way it is. Of course, Indians also speak English. So, again, it doesn't mean that Western culture is better than Indian culture. That's not at all the point. We're talking about perceptions. So, in the history of the world, there's never been a case where a religious movement went to a foreign country, a country different from the country of origin, presented an exotic foreign ethnic culture in terms of dress, cooking, architecture, music, and the requirement for becoming a serious member of that tradition was to adopt all this new ethnic culture. In the history of the world, it never worked. And it's not working now.
What about Christianity?
Christianity...
Which came from the desert. I mean, it came from the...
Christianity only began to spread when they gave up their Palestinian ways and adopted the Roman Empire. And therefore, if you look at the Christianity which actually spread, it was not Palestinian culture. In fact, if you look at Paul, as in St. Paul for the faithful, basically he did Jesus West. The whole point of Paul, if you read the New Testament, the main thing he's talking about is that you don't have to be Palestinian. You don't have to be Jewish. This is different. You can be modern. That's his whole point. And as long as, if you look at the other 11 apostles, who actually did tend to preach that you have to, especially the ones that stayed behind in Israel, most of the apostles, all the apostles who preached that you, for example, have to follow Jewish dietary rules, or you have to do this or that, it didn't work. The movement failed. And they were literally, according to the book of Acts of the apostles, they were starving. They could hardly feed themselves. They could not make new members. And it was only when Paul kind of said, no, you don't have to be Jewish. You can just follow Jesus without all this other stuff. That's when the movement began to spread. And there's no evidence whatsoever that Christians dressed differently than other people, had different diets. I mean, of course, we have our principles. I'm not saying throw out our principles. In fact, if you look at the Chaitanya Charitamrita, do we find any evidence that when Lord Chaitanya took out his Harinam party, that people wore uniforms? That they were dressed differently than the other citizens? Is there any evidence in CC? So, obviously, you don't have to accept this just because I'm saying it. You certainly shouldn't accept it because I'm a Prabhupada disciple or because I'm a sannyasi or guru. I mean, none of that means that you should believe what I'm saying. You should believe what I'm saying if it's rational, if it makes sense, if I have evidence. Don't accept what I say or what anybody else says because they have some title. You should accept it because it makes sense. So, yes.
Like, didn't Prabhupada taught us how to cook, in a different way than the Western way?
Well, we didn't know how to cook. I mean, no one knew. Prabhupada, no one knew how to cook when they joined the movement. No one knew how to cook. But actually, Prabhupada said to me, personally, put all these stories aside, Prabhupada personally said to me, eat what you like and it'll be good for you. That was Prabhupada's instruction to me. And Prabhupada told Allen Ginsberg, because I wrote papers on this. One of the big problems in this movement is that the Prabhupada in the center of ISKCON is a highly filtered Prabhupada. And so people think they know Prabhupada. Yeah, Prabhupada wants this. I wrote a paper giving page after page of Prabhupada quotes. And it turns out that there may be a conservative Prabhupada, but there's a very powerful liberal Prabhupada who has very different views.
Like, for example, is it not said that Krishna likes this particular food?
Well, then he must really like Turkish food. Because, half the things we offer to him come from, the Muslim countries, like kofta and halava and this and that. That's actually Muslim food, and many other preparations. And actually, what Krishna says, what Prabhupada told me, well, let me read you. I don't have it here. 4th canto, chapter 8. Is that? Maybe not. Anyway, I know it. Narada tells Dhruva, when he's instructing Dhruva, that you should now begin to worship Krishna desha kala vibhagavit, understanding the differences of time and place. Prabhupada stresses in his purport, you cannot do in the West what you do in India. He said you should adjust these things so that it's convenient for the Western countries, including the kind of food you offer. It's right there in Prabhupada's purport. When Prabhupada spoke to Allen Ginsberg, and Allen Ginsberg said, well, how will you spread your movement? Everyone has to eat Indian food. Prabhupada said, I never taught that. It's not a question of Indian food. You offer what you like. So, we also know, for example, when Prabhupada installed Krishna Balaram deities in Vrindavan, that they performed all these rituals, and Prabhupada said, we don't need this, but they'll criticize us if we don't do it. And so Prabhupada established deity worship, and everyone was already criticizing him, all these geniuses, in India were criticizing Prabhupada, and so he made certain concessions to avoid criticism. But what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita is to offer him things in the mode of goodness. Half the things devotees offer the deities in ISKCON are not even in the mode of goodness. They're in the mode of passion. For example, spicy food is in the mode of passion. Hot, spicy food is in the mode of passion. In many temples, that's all they offer is hot, spicy food. It's not even in the mode of goodness. So to tell the world that the spiritual science is Krishna only likes Indian culture, who's going to believe that? What Krishna actually teaches in Bhagavad Gita is that offer me things in the mode of goodness. And that's in the Bhagavatam. That's our philosophy. And again, you can read, I'd be happy to send you my papers. There are many, many quotes from Prabhupada that have been forgotten, that are not taught, that people don't know that Prabhupada said these things. And so one of the things I'm trying to do is put all of Prabhupada in the center of ISKCON. All of Prabhupada in the center of ISKCON. Because when you look at all of Prabhupada and look at his many liberal statements, you find that Prabhupada absolutely approved and encouraged the things that we're doing. Anything else?
It's just on that point, and you say that the filtered Prabhupada,
I'm not talking about Ireland.
No.
I'm really not.
I'm not talking about Ireland either. I'm talking about ISKCON.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that's when we were young devotees, it seemed like relatively simple. You did your rounds and you followed the basic programs, and we had certain fast days, and you just got on with your Krishna consciousness. Now it seems that you really need to have a super duperly kind of program just to tell you when it's a cavity. You need to actually probably have about 10 rituals before you do anything in your life or your daily practice. And it just seems that we are overcomplicating the process. And again, I always...
That is frankly, the basically Hinduization of ISKCON, which is really... this is not Hindu bashing. I'm just saying that Prabhupada wanted his own... For example, the fire sacrifice. Prabhupada personally, performed the fire sacrifice at my initiation, and I learned how to do a fire sacrifice. We learned Prabhupada's way. It was so simple. Nowadays, you go to temples, the fire sacrifice, it just like goes on and on and on and on and on. It's just not the way Prabhupada did it. Prabhupada gave us a very simple spiritual science because he wanted the emphasis on outreach, going out, preaching to people, making people devotees. And he kept things very simple.
So on that point then, Maharaj, where do we stand? I heard in the last 12 months that if you go to certain temples, they make they have a deity worship standard, and then they have a Prabhupada disciple standard, because we're not quite up to scratch. And for me, I find that very offensive.
Prabhupada disciple standard?
Yeah, in some temples, because...
I don't understand Prabhupada.
Yeah, because we don't do every mudra that's...
Prabhupada, we didn't even do mudras when Prabhupada was there.
But
we just, we just have little arti tray and you just do the thing. I'm not interfering in deity worship. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just saying that Prabhupada said the temples exist for preaching, and we do a little deity worship to keep the devotees strong. I was personally with Prabhupada in Los Angeles when he received a letter from a temple president in Delhi who had given up a temple and gotten a smaller house because he couldn't afford to maintain it, because he had Radha Krishna deities and everyone left the temple, and he couldn't go out to preach and make life members because he had to do all these artis. And Prabhupada said he did the wrong thing. It was a mistake. He said he should have simplified the deity worship and kept the preaching going. Prabhupada said the temples exist for preaching, and we do some worship to keep ourselves pure. But I've seen, again, in America, not Ireland, in America I've seen so many temples where they just wiped out the preaching so they keep the puja going. Exactly the opposite of what Prabhupada said. Exactly the opposite. But if they wear dhotis, they're the real Prabhupada followers. Exactly the opposite of what Prabhupada said. Again, I'm not interfering in temples. I'm not telling any temple what to do and what not to do. I'm simply saying that there's a crisis. There's a historical crisis. Prabhupada told me many, many times, he emphasized to me over and over again that his whole world mission depended on making the Western mission work. It's in his pranam mantra. Prabhupada wrote his own pranam mantra, Paschatya Desha Tarine. Some really smart people say, what do you mean Krishna West? West is like some kind of vulgar word. What about Prabhupada's pranam mantra? What about Prabhupada's pranam? My point is, you cannot simultaneously denigrate and attract people. And so in the Western world, if we keep denigrating the Western world, we're certainly not going to attract people. I don't mean we have to worship their sinful activities, but in India, frankly, there's an ocean of sinful activities. One of the biggest beef exporters in the world, one of the places that has the highest rates of, abuse of women. So, I'm not bashing India, I'm not bashing the West. Each place has their own good things and their own bad things. But this policy, well, just to be honest, I believe, based on my studies, if you study the psychology of marginalized communities, ISKCON, if you go out in public wearing ISKCON devotional dress, not in India. In India, if a woman wears a sari, she's not a Vaishnavi. In India, if someone sees a woman in a sari, everyone, oh my God, it's a Vaishnavi, she's wearing a sari. Nope. And if someone's wearing a dhoti, he may as likely be a rickshawala as a Vaishnava. And so the point is to say that, this is devotional dress, that's an ISKCON creation. That's not in India like that. It's an ISKCON creation. So, my simple point is that we have to see what works. We have to somehow or other get through to people. We have to somehow or other, I mean, Bhaktisiddhanta said his disciples could eat meat in London if they had to save people. When we really care about the public, when we really care about the fallen souls, when we really see them as family, because Krishna says in the Gita, I'm the father of this universe. Actually says it twice and Arjuna says it once. So, where's the compassion? How much do we care about the world? Do we really care about those people? Or do we just think they'll just be manipulated into their own salvation? We don't have to care about how they feel. We don't have to care about what they think because we can manipulate them. We have the power to bring them to Krishna without even their consent. When we really care about the world and just do whatever it takes to save those people. Prabhupada, this is a direct quote from Prabhupada, making all adjustments, taking all risks to make the movement work in the West. So that's what I wanted, that's what I'd like to see, a Hare Krishna movement of intelligent, rational people, not people that kind of like mindlessly, cover their hands so that evil spirits don't invade them, and people that think that, thread is somehow polluting people, all this stuff, all these stories, and there's like endless stories that, if you wear a shirt, then you think you're better than God. A simple spiritual science, rational, intelligent. We do everything humanly possible to make people comfortable with us. We don't give up our basic principles, but we do everything else. If we don't restore the Western mission, we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble. In fact, a historical window is closing. And that is, because ISKCON began in the West, to this day, the most senior spiritual leaders in this movement, except Gopal Krishna, are actually Western. And that's going to end. Within your lifetime, most of you, that's going to end. And when there are no longer senior Western spiritual leaders, the transformation of this movement into something else is going to be complete. It's a real historical crisis. Whether or not people know about it, it's a real historical crisis. It is urgent that we restore our Western mission. Prabhupada told me so many times that his movement would only work if our movement was powerful in the West. And it's not. Every day people chant Paschatya Desha Tarine. Have you seen a Western country that's saved? I haven't. So it seems to me those who really care about Prabhupada will defend his honor by making his words come true. And it's not going to happen automatically. You don't just have to show up and dance around and the world's going to surrender. It doesn't work that way. We actually have to take the time to understand people, to find a way to reach them, to create programs that they're comfortable with, to study, history. We have to earn it. It's not going to happen automatically. We actually have to earn it. Like everybody else does. Like every other, I can't say every other successful religion, but all those religions that really are growing in the Western world earn it. And so we need to really wake up and get to work and find ways to make people comfortable with us, find ways to reach them somehow, instead of just fighting with ourselves or, just telling people all kinds of weird superstitions, just pure, simple spiritual science. So, thank you all very much. I hope I haven't offended anyone. My desire really is just to, I owe this to Prabhupada. Prabhupada somehow trusted me, confided in me, and I'm just trying to convince you to give your life to Prabhupada and not waste time doing anything else. And find a way to reach the people of this country, whatever it takes. Don't change the basic principles, obviously, but in terms of the way we present ourselves, we have to find a way to make this work. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Maharaj, for coming. Maharaj agreed to come at very short notice, and I really appreciate it.
But my pleasure.
he was planning to do something else all week, so we kind of nabbed him very quickly. So we're hoping that sometime.
No, as soon as I saw I had a chance to come and harass a bunch of devotees, I couldn't turn it down. Hare Krishna.
Nanda Das Goswami Ki.
Yeah.